All right. Thank you everyone for having us today. So Nazran and I have been writing the report for PPRs, the situational analysis. Just very quickly, I would like to go into a little bit on public low-cost housing schemes in Malaysia, just to give that kind of background. I'm sure everybody will get an idea. So, doesn't work.
The next
Yeah, next month. Right. So just a quick look at public affordable housing schemes. It's very important to contextualize the PPRs within the policies that are relevant. It started off with a major urban resettlement program around the 2000s and earlier, when there was a mass exodus of people from rural to urban areas, and that caused a lot of what people say urban slums, settler communities, things like that. And also this was at least largely catalyzed by the new economic policy. So what resulted was a move to create the zero squatter policy to eradicate all settlers. So one of the strategies, the key strategy, was to house all some communities in PPRs, and that's why we see PPRs today are very high density, many stories. And now that we are 20 years into most of the buildings, we're seeing many issues with them. It's a long and pervasive problem, right? So just a little background. They started off with the Perumahan Kos Awam, which was then subsumed by the PPR project. And in PPR, there's two models. So the first is the rental model of 124 ringgit per month, or a rent-to-own model that would price a PPR unit. So I'll just quickly finish, and then we also will focus on PPRTs, which are for the rural population. Can we go to the next slide?
next slide. Yeah.
Maybe you can take one. I need to go get my key.
Thanks. Okay, so for this report, we looked at 38 constituencies. Most of them are PPR, so quickly run down through it. The Sungai Buloh, constituency Sungai Buloh was covered. Kuantan, Kanga, Parit Punsal, Jelun, Tebrau, and Mutajam, all PPRs. There was one unique PPRT example in Kalapakan in southeast Sabah. And lastly, there was also a Rumah Syarikat Perumahan Negara Berhad program in Gua Musang, Kelantan. So those are the constituencies covered. So all the findings and are based from these constituencies. So next slide, please. So part two, we'll be looking at the specific findings and discussions. So, but before we get into the details of the finding discussion, of course, there's a lot that was covered in all the constituencies, a lot mentioned, a lot talked about. So we tried to break it down into three main themes, and you can see those three main themes as per this slide, which are infrastructure, maintenance, and social problems. And because of the importance of SDGs to what we're doing here, so for each of the constituencies, for each of the teams, we put the relevant SDGs for each particular category. So we see SDG 9 for infrastructure, building resilient infrastructure. I won't read through the whole thing, you can see it there. SDG 11.1 specifically comes up for all three teams: access all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services, and upgrading of slums. And then there's also SDG 6 and 1, SDG 6 specifically being ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, whereas for SDG 1 for social problems is the ending of poverty in all forms everywhere. So now we move on to the first specific theme, which is infrastructure. Next slide, please. Okay, so for infrastructure, we have about 5 sub-topics, or 6 topics, sorry, to be exact. So because of the importance of the quotes and what people themselves saying, we've also shared quotes on the right-hand side of the slide for those particular subtopics where there were relevant quotes, and I may read through some depending on how things go. But the first thing that was mentioned in a lot of the PPRs was insufficient parking. So for some of the units in these PPRs, they have at least 2 to 3 cars And residents also mentioned they were required to park a significant distance from their PPRs, posing an inconvenience and safety concern to many of them. Parking also operated on a first come first served basis, so there's a like free for all. So that can also leave some without parking and also lead to some a lot of tensions and difficulties amongst residents. And then also another sort of safety issues, cars are parked near entrances as well, which causes issues like narrowing of access lanes and block emergency vehicles. So just to quickly read one of the interesting quotes in the second one on the right hand side. So in Desa Wawasan Bukit Mertajam, resident said, of course, these quotes are all in Malay, so this is our best translation of it. Residents come back from work feeling very tired, but then there's no parking. So naturally, there's some fighting, right? We try to settle the matter reasonably, indicating tensions as a consequence of the insufficient parking. So then we move on to the second infrastructure topic. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this one was specifically for the so non-PPRs that we looked at, being the PPRTs and the Rumah SPNMP, because most of the PPRs are in quite heavily dense urban areas, so they are relatively close to amenities and important amenities like police stations, fire stations, and schools. But in a place like PPRT Kampung Sudong Lawut in Kalabakan, the residents shared that they do not have access to viable roads. So students need to cross rivers to get to school, use small jetties, and there are even safety concerns because in these rivers there are present crocodiles. Whereas the Masyarakat Kesedah and Gunung Busang also shared that they are located quite distance away from important amenities such as police stations, fire stations, and schools. So moving on to the next slide. So number 3 is the lack of common facilities for community gathering. So in the number of people also, it was highlighted that they're lacking those to carry out important activities. So here we have a couple of specific examples. So PPR Section 8 in the constituency of Sungai Buloh, residents shared that organization participation in community activities was confined by the inadequate common spaces at PPRs with only one small activity space and one outdoor gazebo provided. Whereas PPR flat Tojabit in Jelon, the lack of facilities to accommodate lack of facilities to accommodate diverse communities in particular led to tensions regarding placement of deceased bodies according to religious and customary rites. So this is a very specific, unique situation, and I'll further elaborate in the quote above on the right hand side. So taken from a flat to the bit. So the residents shared that we would like to request a pondok for deceased Hindus, especially non-Muslims, because otherwise this could lead to many problems. Previously, the state government had said they would create a location just for deceased non-Muslims to place the bodies, but currently the bodies are placed in the hall right behind the surau and is left there for a few days, which then becomes an issue. So just highlighting the problems that can result as a lack of community facilities or common facilities. Next slide. So now another significant issue that was especially highlighted in Tebrau, is the lack of small scale commercial activity. So for many residents there, of course, their main source of income, if not only source of income, is to carry out business and they want to carry out nearby their PPRs or in their PPRs itself. So residents reported they were keen to generate income from small businesses within the vicinity of the PPRs, but and of course for some that said this was their main source of income. However, the PPRs do not provide sufficient bases, sites or areas for residents to engage in small scale commercial activities. And the residents also reported that a similar issue when it came to carrying out urban farming as well. That's another infrastructure matter being faced. Let me move on to the next point. So another, very common and prevalent issue is insufficient CCTV and lighting, which will also have impact on the social problem that we'll highlight later on. So residents share that safety is concerned as a result of insufficient CCTVs and inadequate lighting within the PPR's compound. For example, in PPR Desa Mutiara in Tebrau, residents shared that there were no street lights, thus contributing to incidences of theft and crime. Whereas in PPR Desa Wawasan in Mertajam Penang, residents similarly reported a lack of adequate lighting in corridors, and this was also echoed in Sirisena as well, where there was only CCTVs in certain locations, leaving other areas prone to crime. So as one resident said in PPR Desa Wawasan, when people want to come in, the corridors have no lights. Thus, it is dangerous to come back to the area. highlighting residents' fears as a consequence of the lack of CCTV and lighting. And then we'll move on to the final infrastructure issue. So here we're mainly focused on the Desa Mutiara resident, but wildlife dangers do also exist in a number of other PPRs with regards to animals such as wild dogs, cats, and snakes as well. But in Tebrau, in the interviews, the first thing that was even mentioned when they were asked about what was a significant problem, they specifically focused on monkey attacks. And these monkey attacks, as seen in the quotes here, they've even attacked residents, and there have been cases of this happening. So these are not just been attacks on the resident, but it's led to the destruction of farms and physical harm as well. And they've attributed this to poor infrastructure, such as due to insufficient allocation for proper fencing around the PPR compound. So that's for infrastructure. If we move on to the next slide, just sharing some photos that are in the report. On the left-hand side is within Kuantan. On the right-hand side is Sungai Buloh, to give an idea of the infrastructure within PPR. Yes, so we move on to the next main theme, which is maintenance. So yeah, one of the biggest issues also raised in almost all the PPRs was the issue of rubbish disposal. So residents have shared like a couple of different or important perspectives on this issue. So of course they complain about large piles up of rubbish, but in Desa Wawasan, the residents there shared that this was down to behaviors of residents who throw rubbish carelessly from higher floors to lower floors. As seen in the quote on the upper right hand corner, that behavior we can't get them to change. That's their behavior, to throw it to the bottom or throw it right out, even though there's already a big dustbin, but they will not put it in the big dustbin. However, some have also attributed it to authorities as well, or mainly the authorities. So in PPR Desa Mutiara, the residents shared the insufficient number of rubbish bins across all levels of the PPR compound, as well as poor rubbish collection by the authorities. So we move on to the next slide. Yes, another big common problem was lift maintenance. So residents have, in many PPR reported that there's a regular lift breakdowns and long repair times, which is especially problematic for those PPRs that are 10 stories or above in terms of height. And then in specific examples in PPR Situational in Kanga, they said that the elderly and Okayo residents were not even able to receive required health treatments as a result of poor lift maintenance. Whereas PPR Desa Wawasan said this also is especially concerning for the children when they play in the lifts or play around the lifts start to not work and then they get stuck in it. So yes, this is another major concern. So we move on to the third part. The issue, which is the poor maintenance. So in all these PPRs, there were specific issues to that PPR that were maybe not common throughout, but this is just to give a further highlighting further examples of maintenance problems seen throughout PPRs in general. So in Section 8, against Sungai Buloh constituency, for maintenance of children playgrounds such as uncovered floors, created unsafe conditions for children when they play. In Desa Mutiara, residents shared concerns that the roofs were in poor condition. In Ato Jabit, respondents further shared that leaks from pipes and drainage issues were a hazard for kids playing in these areas. Yeah, so that's the last subtopic for maintenance. And next slide, please. So just the one in Sungai Buloh on the left-hand side, that's the playground, and the right-hand side is the lifts. So I'll quickly go through the social problems because I'm aware of the time. So when we look at social problems, there's the issue of drug use. That's one of the main ones. Prevalent across both PPRs and is traced to wider social issues and deprivation, including high rates of youth unemployment, poor supply and suitability of jobs in the area, and poor qualifications. And specific examples, PPR Situational, residents reported that drug dealers were actively selling drugs within the area, turning into a hub of drug dealing. Whereas in PPR Flat, Pak Mahat, they also shared that drug use was a major concern, but it is always being addressed through cooperation with the Jawatan Kuasa Kemajuan dan Keselamatan Kampung JKKK. Then we move on to the next big social problem, which is theft and vandalism. So here we have a few specific examples. In Situational and Kanga, lifts were damaged by vandals and were left unrepaired. Also in Situational, there was reported there were rampant petty crimes such as theft of light fixtures and spare motorcycle parts. Whereas in Bukit Mertajam, residents shared how theft became an inconvenience, a major inconvenience, as thieves stole a number of things, including motor parts, water tanks, wires, and cables. And then the last big social problem, we're seeing sexual crimes and gender-based violence. So a number of PPRs have raised this as a major issue, and a few specific examples are shared here. For example, in Perumahan flat Park Mat, sexual harassment was reported by people with even people with disabilities and the OPU community. And flat Park Mat against residents reported that perpetrators of domestic violence were linked to alcoholism, drug use, and money lending. And in Desa Mutiara Tebrau, residents reported the occurrence of sexual harassment, but they have shared that the establishment of a community police has led to a decline in cases. So now, this is the findings and discussion. So share the floor back to Min, who will go through the policy recommendations.
Right. So in terms of the policy recommendations, we recognize that. Right. In terms of policy recommendations, but the concerns raised by the PPR residents indicate that the issues they face are broad, but they often intersect with each other, and this perpetuates a vicious cycle of conditions that they have to struggle with. So, as a whole, we think that policy solutions will definitely require major collaboration across all authorities, federal, state, local government agencies, alongside civil society and community leaders for it to be truly effective. And we also recognize that the issues that PPR residents experience are mainly born out of deprivation. So the solutions will have to intersect with wider national policy strategies. And the policy recommendations in this section will focus on low-hanging branches, but also the need to make sure it's sustainable over time. So it will be short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And they'll be largely designed for PPRs because that's the majority of the developments that we looked at. Next slide, please. So the first issue, this is a short-term policy recommendation, is on making it resident-centric and centering community voices. The first is that we would like to suggest an institutionalization of a mechanism or a system that includes consultations with residents for policymaking and understanding that they are the ones who understand the issues most intimately and to prevent top-down approaches. Next, we would like to strengthen community leadership. There are existing arms that we can use, which is Kawasan Rumah Tetangga, KRT committee. And there's also a need to provide them material resources and explore options to remunerate these positions, or else we were burdening a cash-strapped community even further, and they will reduce motivation to take up such jobs. We also would like to explore the options for a community policing strategy where there's close collaboration between community councils and the police, neighborhood police posts. This is something that was raised earlier and that was quite successful in certain PPRs. But at the same time, we understand that not all situations require policing. We don't want to continuously persecute already vulnerable communities. So we would like to suggest community level crisis response. So that means community interventions, non-policing interventions, like specific ones for mental health interventions, for example, that are more considerate and compassionate to the people that we're looking at. Next slide. So next will be interesting some of these bigger infrastructure concerns. It's quite a big issue, and I think one of the best ways we can look is at existing policies with the national community policy. So the national community policy in 2019 was 2018-2019. It started, and then they had this Secretariat Muafakat community, and it was not implemented across all PPRs. But the PPRs that have had this implemented have seen certain infrastructure improvements in terms of like football courts and things like that. So I think there is a need to expand this program across different PPRs. See why is there a roadblock? Why is this pilot program only stopping here, and how it can be applied to other places. And next slide. Another one is maintenance problems. I mean, we have to talk about it. So very easy, rubbish disposal. We need more places to throw rubbish. We need the authorities to be held accountable. Next, big essential facilities, but it should start with better workmanship, better quality materials, and a transition towards customer-oriented supervision and monitoring. And finally, we do need to address maintenance fee payment because it's a vicious cycle. When some people don't pay, maintenance will obviously go down. So we do think that there is space for the government to come in and pay for some of the more safety-related maintenance issues that has been done before. I think that's something they need to start doing now. And then there also should be some stronger long-term enforcement of maintenance fee payments by residents, and to start to rethink new ways of communication with residents on maintenance fees. Okay, I'm going through really quickly. I promise on the next one. Okay, maintenance culture, we realize that there needs to be more long-term action, and that means we need to locate the residents themselves as the locus of action and ensure that it is sustainable. So we would like to adopt this maintenance culture framework and integrate it into a wider overall maintenance policy for all public low-cost housing. in a few minutes. And this policy should involve key aspects of maintenance culture, such as good leadership, communication, rewards and recognition, teamwork, training, education, to ensure that the residents continue taking this on. Of course, raising awareness is very much, it's self-explanatory. And finally, we also think it's important to explore the link between ownership models and maintenance culture. There is some evidence that houses that are owned by the residents actually have better maintenance culture. So we need to explore whether this link exists and how we can foster a stronger sense of ownership for all residents, even those who are only working on a rent-to-own basis. And the final policy recommendation is on public transportation services policies. This will involve a reform of wider public transportation policy because these things don't work in a silo. So we're looking at research when it comes to traveling. Travel costs and travel time is integral. In fact, it's a critical factor. So there might be space to explore options for subsidies for the B40 and PPR, especially for PPR residents, and also a systematic evaluation of the travel times and accessibility of residents to their workplaces. Because if it's going to take a long time on public transport, they might as well just drive in. Right. And we also need to start assessing last mile transport accessibility. How close are PPRs to last mile transport, like buses? Are there options that they can take, scooters, bicycles to rent and things like that, so that they reduce the dependence on cars, which is very expensive, and PPRs are unable to expand their parking lot anyway. And finally, for PPRTs or Rumah SPNB that are in very rural areas, we do suggest sort of trying to integrate them into a wider transit-oriented development plan. This TOD plan is something that has been adopted across Malaysia in different areas. But if we can sort of make those places a hub for activity with public services, schools nearby, I think that might be useful and good in the long term. I think that's it. Sorry, we went over time a little bit, but thank you everyone for listening.
Don't worry, I'm not going to do a repeat of his drilling yesterday. Thank you for the explanation. I think it fills all the sort of things that behind issues. I recommend this report. The efficiency of the government agency and authority to address issues. We've been looking at the report, very much looking at the feedback of stakeholders as the residents, all right? But the other important sectorial player is actually the government. So, but we haven't emphasized a lot on government because most of our interviews were actually on the stakeholders, right? So, I think there's a clear disconnect between all our relevant government agencies. The agencies that are serving the PPR, there is a disconnect in the way they serve. There's a broken value service chain there. They are all working in silos. While that was mentioned in the report of adopting a holistic approach, the report can highlight examples of the disconnect. So perhaps highlighting the disconnect between the federal KPKT and the state-run PPRs, highlighting problematic areas in the value chain of service delivery. I think this DASA committee is an excellent document produced by KPKT during the previous minister, Suraida. That's Suraida, under Suraida. Yeah. Implementation is nearly zero. The ideas all there were very good. No, I think they have captured the situation there, but the implementation depends on structural changes. So they will not be able to do it because they're working across the silos, and there is a disconnect. So within the department itself, they have disconnect. Within ministries and agencies, there's disconnect. So it's really quite an impossible thing to solve. Then the feasibility of the recommendation in addressing the issue. While much has been mentioned about the woes of our PPR residents, the feedback and recommendations from residents indicate a knowledge gap as they are able to see the dimensions that they know and have omitted areas that they do not know. and that they do not know that they don't know. All right. This holistic approach that covers multi-dimensional aspects needs to be highlighted strongly in the recommendations. So don't overemphasize just the feedback of the residents. But what about that gap of knowledge that is needed to provide the right solutions? So I think we have to bring that up. Of course, that is recommended also in the recommendations. I think the recommendations cover quite a lot, but our recommendations go nowhere if they don't see the sort of gap, the silo gap that they are operating in. And they will continue to operate in the silo gap because the culture has been changed. And that needs a political leadership. And that. Important agencies that will let out are building managers, can be state agencies like Lembaga Perumahan dan Hartanah, local councils, commissioner of buildings. They should be targeted in the interviews. So I think this is a major gap in terms of feedback that we haven't received. What is the attitude of Lembaga Perumahan and all? Because many of the issues that were raised up are unfair, discriminatory and all, is based on the government side. The government side. Okay, so I think in this respect, it will help perhaps if I share with you our case study of PPR Kota Damansara, and we did that up to I think 5 years ago. But we track it from MPPJ, looking after the PPR, to PHSSB, the Lembaga Perumahan of the state, looking after the PPR. So the issues that you mentioned are there 10 years ago, but the solutions are still lacking. All right, how do you do the thing? So I think you have identified correctly that the lack of empowerment, residents are not given the right to speak. They are also intimidated by the building management, especially if they are run by local councils or state agencies. All right. When MPPJ run it, they abuse the building management contractor. Things that need repairing, they say no budget. So the building contractor couldn't do anything. So the place was deplorable. But when PHSSB came to took over, there was a very good person that was very strict. And the PPR people were not used to all the strictness now, but they all fell into place when things were strict and things were put on correctly. But subsequent to that, and this is a problem. People that perform very well get sacked. So he got sacked from the Lembaga, because he was too strict. And then the other things that is underlying all this is also ministers or excos don't have all the powers. And this is something that the MPs and adjuns also recognize. I'm the minister, you are supposed to look after me. But I as a minister will fear you, because if I make you angry, you will sabotage me. Which is exactly what happened with Lembaga Perumahan, right? The person didn't respect the exco, did not reply to letters and all. And literally, the exco couldn't do anything when it comes to this. But then again, KPKT is also a problem, because like commission of buildings, appointment of building managers, or Lembah Subang, it is directly under KPKT. They appoint the wrong building managers and nobody do anything about it. You can have round table discussing and all. So at the end of the day, we have the Dasai community. We have illustrated also in this report all the things. But unless we bring out the sort of real problems behind it, we will not solve it, right? So it's a very delicate situation we are in. We want to please everybody, but this is the real problem. So political interference is also another problem, which probably it didn't come out from your things. You talk of there was no racial problems. All right, sometimes there's no racial problems, but inside PPR Kota Damansara itself, a tremendous amount of division between the same racial group. Everybody fighting for power. And if you check the ROS, there's a numerous number of Sakwans that are put up there already. They come out and they collapse, they come out and they collapse. And politicians come in and say that, oh, the resident association is with the opposition. I'll take the surah. So different groups inside there. It's particularly very bad in PPR Kota Damansara. And then on top of that, NGOs going in there also fight among themselves and backstab each other. All right. So it is true that what you say about and it's a very important thing, in the design of a PPR, you will need space, safe space for studies, safe space for economic things as well. But the fight is always about the hall. And formally, UMNO was using the hall, so you don't touch it. So even when the change of government comes in, getting back the hall is not difficult. It's a difficult thing. All these things can be solved quite easily if there's a political will to do that. But we have got to highlight that in our report that such things do happen. And these are the recommendations, but the source of it is the whole of society approach. Not being able to do the whole of society approach. There's intra-community strife. The KRP, RA, and building management are the main culprits depending on themselves, and then other groupings as well. AADK, actually, they are a very good agency. They see it holistically that they're not only about drugs, they're about keeping the youth occupied, not positively and all. But they are not assisted by the other agencies, which is difficult. The PPR design, I'm glad you all mentioned about the transportation and TOD, transit-oriented development. Those are big potential things that could help. You see that all the PPRs are lack of parking space. Always the same, isn't it? But it's not only about the management. If you get a good management, you can solve that. But the whole process of PPR is to push them away from good areas. The more you locate them outside, the better. And all of them own cars. And then people will go in there and say that, these people are not poor. You look at the amount of cars they have. You look at the astro dishes they have. It's all a wrong indicator of the thing. Without the car, they cannot work. So these are all big problems. But TOD right now, especially in PJ, is all for high-rise condominium, expensive ones. This is the best part to follow what Singapore has done to build up proper public housing. But I think the political motive and the development ethics is not there. Everything is all driven by the developers pushing it. So I think one thing that you have mentioned very important, which people don't emphasize on that, is we need a platform for information and communication. If we know exactly how the building manager is accepting people in PPR, then we know that they're not on a racist policy or on something else. PPR Kota Damansara has actually turned into a profit-making kind of thing. If you can afford to pay the rental, we take it in. Where else, actually, it is supposed to be a place for the vulnerable. All right. So I think the whole social purpose is being lost here. And on top of that, they raise the fees. And Selangor is the only one. Fortunately, they don't have that many PPRs. They raise it to 250. The only one in the country. Right? So, well, they want to maintain it. But again, if we speak to Selangor portfolios, you'll find that after the embargo had taken over, there were 2 injections of $5 billion. And when I went back, I produced another report, it was in a dilapidated state. So in other words, this is the black hole that you keep on pouring in money in. And the government, sooner they know it, the better. Savings in the beginning, and then after that, massive social costs and physical costs later on. So I think the relations of the issues to the SDG is well addressed. But I think the context is this. Although we got 17, most of them are actually very minor. The major one is no poverty. If it is in PPR, it is no poverty. And then the other thing is hopefully they will have decent work and economic growth and sustainable cities and commerce. But all this no hunger, good health, well-being, quality education and all, they are all very subset of the whole thing. the main drivers are some of the three main ones. And the other thing is the number 16 and 17 is the one that is preventing us from achieving it. Strong institutions, we do not have strong institutions, and partnership, the partnership part. Without partnership, you can't get the whole society approach, and without whole society approach, you cannot solve all these things. So some of the things are actually better covered for poverty PPR under MPI, the multi poverty indicators. When you talk of living conditions, that is a more local. Well, the SDG is very global here. The health aspect of it, and so perhaps when we write about the relationship to SDG, we can contextualize so that okay. So the representation of grassroots in the report, I think the JP9, ADK, police, COB, KPKP, the government sector has been not emphasized enough. Overall presentation of report, I think you need to have a bit more cohesive build up towards the recommendation and the conclusion. No, it is good to actually highlight that there are two main players, multi-sectorial, government, and the community. But the business also important, but not that important in this particular respect. But the implementation can be a short term, medium term, long term, which is what you have said quite correctly. But the implementation for the short term involves the stakeholders now, a culture change, a building up of a people structure. No, those things are normally not emphasized enough in recommendations. Right. So, but all the things were there. You have stated that no, you must empower the people, this and that. And how do you empower the people? No, as an NGO, what I did was I get the PPR people to sit down with the building managers, which is Lembaga Perumahan, right? And under this person asked me, that was sad, he's a very good person. We had some discussions on that. But when he was replaced, the man just walked out of the discussion. I don't have to speak to you. So you just follow what I say. No, it's that kind of thing which was covered in yesterday's P40, when we say that the lack of cooperation from the government. No? So unless we have a culture, and this again needs a culture change, it's hard to solve this problem as well. So some things are longer term, but the politicians and all must know that they have to address structural changes. In the meantime, we do the best we can of this. Then we meet halfway. So then they will see that they have got a role to play in the law making. They've got a role to play getting it aligned KPKT with the rest of the people as well. Yeah. So I think sorry, I think the review must have run a bit over 10 minutes. Yeah. Thank you.